Hello, everyone. This is Dom. I just thought I'd add this introduction to this pretty lengthy episode. It was a blast making it, but just a caveat before you begin it. Sam and I entered this conversation with different presuppositions. I sat down in front of the mic thinking that we actually agreed. So we have had conversations in the past with other friends where we talked about this topic, and I sided with Sam and disagreed with the other friends. Sam, however, was disagreeing with these other friends as well, but the thing is, since these other friends were Catholic and I'm Catholic, and I was also trying to monitor the disagreement and see where we could kind of come together, I think that Sam assumed that we disagreed, so me and him. So as we sat down, I sat in front of the mic thinking, okay, let's see how we can explain how my other friends were wrong and how me and you, Sam, are right. But I think Sam sat down thinking, okay, I'm going to hash this out with Dom and see how the Catholic position is different from the one I hold as a Protestant, which is not unfair because we often talk about Catholic and Protestant things, and so there often is real disagreements. But here I sat down and I was thinking, I'm on Sam's team for this one. So anyway, the whole point of this introduction is to say, enjoy the episode. I think it was a great one, but just keep in mind as you listen, this whole time I think we're agreeing, he thinks we're disagreeing. So it's going to, and you'll see this, it comes out in the episode, but we do come at the end to the realization that we're both on the same page, which is actually really cool because it's a good example of fruitful dialogue that doesn't relativize the truth, if that makes sense. So I hope you guys enjoy. Thanks a lot for listening. Hello everyone, welcome to the Logos Project. This is your host Dom. For this episode, Sam and I tackle a big topic that we will surely have to revisit. I hope you enjoy. Hello everybody, welcome to the Logos Project. This is your host Dom, and I'm joined again by my great, wonderful, amazing friend and roommate.
I'm gonna need more adjectives. Keep going.
Anyway, welcome Sam. It's great to have you on the show. We talked earlier today, I think it was, that we wanted to talk about something. It's actually pretty broad, but the topic is love. I think it's very culturally relevant, which is the point.
Very true. One love, with the... No, I'm just kidding. Isn't that like an LGBT, like...
I thought that was it's a tennis thing.
What?
Yeah.
I don't know, man.
That's how they...
Right.
You never heard of that before? Well, when they play tennis, 1 love, 30 love.
Oh, yeah, it's like some method of scoring or something,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Like, I literally know zero about tennis. Like, I grew up in the middle of
I
nowhere.
don't know
Like, we
anything
didn't have any of those, like, auxiliary sports. We had football and
Yeah.
basketball. That was literally it.
Gotcha. Those are the good ones. I like those too.
So anyway, last night I had a fascinating discussion with a friend of mine about, it started, the difference between Catholicism and Protestantism, which it usually does.
Oh.
And I think a lot of it does boil down to like a different definition of love.
Gotcha.
Right. So we've talked before about how, my more or less like beef with Mass. And I think you were able to reciprocate a lot of these feelings in the sense that you think sometimes Mass is lacking in like the energy and the emotion, right? And emotion is a very charged word, and we're gonna break that down, I think.
Yeah.
But it's lacking in the emotion, maybe that Protestant churches have sometimes. Feel free to. I don't want to misrepresent you at all, so
Yeah.
feel free to.
No, I don't think that's what I would say.
Okay,
I do think
yeah,
it's
go for it.
lacking in the way it's being celebrated in many areas. Emotion is probably not where I would go. Because I think what you're thinking about is, how do I put this? More, like you said, energy, right? More movement, more sensation. Is that fair?
Sensation is a good word.
Yeah.
Maybe what if I said positive? It's lacking in like positive emotion. Is that the same? Would that
negative emotion would be pretty awful? No.
No, there can be. Well, I mean, it's what is a negative emotion, right? So you could say sadness is a negative emotion. I think everybody would agree with that.
Yeah.
And is there when you're reflecting on the passion, like, is there a sadness there?
Yeah.
Is it like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I don't know. I would call that a negative emotion, and that's not usually something that we like lean toward in Protestantism.
Gotcha.
Not that I think that's a bad thing, right? Yeah, both things are important.
Yeah, I think both are important. Both are good. But keep going. So where did this conversation end?
So the way the conversation went is that she basically pointed out that I had a misconstrued definition of love.
Okay.
In the sense that she said that what I was describing was passion. Okay. So I would argue that I ended up conceding, I think, but I'm not happy about it. So I want to explore it.
I like your
honesty.
Is
that fair? Yeah. So, it was definitely something I need to think about more.
Okay.
She was attempting to, divorce. That's kind of a weird word to use here, right? Divorce love from emotion.
Yeah.
Completely. And it's like, well, that emotion that you're feeling is actually passion. And I'm like, I see what you're saying, and it makes sense.
Yeah.
But I don't like it. So, what is love? Baby, don't hurt me. Don't hurt me no more.
Yeah, dude. Let's talk about this. So obviously, this is a freelance episode. They're all freelance.
Yeah, we're just shooting from the hip.
Shooting from the hip.
Yeah.
So hopefully, no Thomists will be listening to us.
Well, I just want to hear kind of what your thoughts are. You're pretty steeped in this stuff, whether it be theology or like philosophy. And love's been around a long time.
Well, so that's what I want to get into, right? Is how love has been considered throughout history, and what it's been considered to be, and also like how we think of it today. Is it the same, or is it different from I don't know, say 500 years ago? What about 2,000 years ago? You know what I mean? So I think all that's really important and relevant for the question of how we understand love today, and should we maybe understand it better, or maybe just the way it is good? Like, I think those are important questions. So. Okay, I'll embarrass myself. Hopefully no Thomists are listening, but I'll start with St. Thomas. So Thomas Aquinas, 1200s, right? 13th century philosopher.
Great year.
I mean, maybe I should start earlier with the Greeks. I'll start with the Greeks. Let me see here. Okay, the Greeks had 4 words for love. 4 different words.
Just 4? I actually thought it was more than that.
I only know 4.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Good place to start. Just kidding.
There's obviously so we as Christians we hear this one a lot, which is agape.
Agape.
Yeah. And I want to talk about that one. There's also eros.
Okay.
Right, where we get the word erotic, and there's also philia, like philosophy. Sophia is wisdom, so philosophy is the love of wisdom. Then we have storge. I don't know how you say it.
Storge
vodka. Storge is more like natural love, like a love that a parent has for his child, or sibling love, something that's just part of nature. You're born with it, kind of thing. Does that make sense?
Okay, yeah. But do you want to define all those specifically? You didn't say. So define agape. I guess you define the rest of them.
Well, agape for the Greeks, because the meaning changed somewhat.
Everything is so nuanced for you.
I'm so sorry.
I mean, I respect it. Keep going.
Yeah. Agape is the love. How to put this? Let me check my notes. I don't think it changed, actually. Okay. So it was used by Homer as a verb, but you do find it in the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Old Testament.
I don't think Homer Simpson was around back then.
Well, Bart was.
Okay.
No. Okay. So agape is more of the love that God has for us. Or that we have for God. So for Homer, the gods, right? So like the love I have for Zeus would be described as I am agapeing Zeus.
Okay. So which one of these would you apply to a man loving a woman?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for the Greeks, you would probably use philia. So philia is friendship love. It can be platonic, pun intended, because we're talking about Plato here. but can also be sexual. It really is a kind of human to human romance. That's what philia means. Now, when you talk about eros, which is kind of the tricky part here, when you think of erotic today, what do you think? You think sexual love, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, in literature it's used that way. But eros for Plato meant that desire which leads us to the good, the ultimate good, so to God. So eros is what leaves the world behind, the material world behind, and unites us to the purely spiritual good. So it's almost the opposite. I think that's interesting.
That is interesting.
And so I'll move away from the Greeks here in a bit. I just wanted to lay that foundation. Storge is, mom to son, brother to sister. That's just the natural love that happens. So agape is, you might say, divine love. Eros is the love of the good, which seeks to escape what pulls us down away from the true, the good, and the beautiful. So it's much more of a philosophical love. And then you have philia, which is friendship and romantic at times. And then finally storge, which is kinship love. Not kingship, but kinship love. So that's the Greeks. I just wanted to cover those guys.
Okay. Well, so one thing I want to point out real quick is because if we're gonna boil down a definition of love.
I want to
talk about
get there.
Okay.
But I want to get there with you by looking at everything together.
And we absolutely should.
Yeah.
I guess one thing I want to point out, right, is that, right, I want to discuss the love that God has for us and how we reciprocate that.
Me too.
And I also want to discuss a man and a wife, more or less, right?
Me too.
Because these are important things.
Yes.
So it's like, are we going to pair those, not pair those off, but branch those off into two separate definitions of love? Because I think it's important that those things be
one definition.
Yeah, or at least like in line, right? In the sense, so John 15, the Great Commandment, is like love each other as I have loved you.
Yeah.
Right. So in my mind, it's like those things should be intertwined heavily.
Okay. Yeah.
Is that unfair?
No.
And are we going to be able to come to some semblance of a definition that intertwines both of those things?
I believe so.
Right. Because so you
I have a
philia.
trajectory in my mind.
Okay.
That will bring us to a single definition.
That's what I want.
Yeah.
That's what I want. So I just want to make sure we're on the same page.
Yeah.
Because you said, philia, the love into philosophy, the love of wisdom. Well, I would argue that you can't love an idea in the same way that you can love a person or
I would agree
God,
with you.
right? Or a dog. Because I love my puppy.
Yeah, I think you're right. The love is a category. It's not just one thing. But I do think we'll be able to come to a better understanding of what we mean by it and come up with a working definition. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I like it.
Okay, so before I move on to the early Christians, I want to get a little bit more about what you think. So talk maybe a little bit more about the dynamic, right? The Protestant Catholic dynamic that you perceive, as well as maybe the one that comes up in conversations with other Christians. It doesn't have to be just Catholic Protestant, right?
True,
So
yeah.
Give me some of your thoughts on that, if you want.
So I think, and I want to talk about the Holy Spirit, right, and those effects in the sense where I think Protestantism ties love. Maybe this is just me. Okay, ties love to the Holy Spirit in the sense of like this overwhelming emotion that is like a giving of yourself to something, right? And I think in talking to said named Catholic person last night, right, who I have a lot of respect for, so I'm not trying to diminish anything. It seems as though Catholicism is trying to divorce emotion from love. In the sense where love is an action and it's something that you do whether you want to or not.
Yeah.
Right? And that's fair because like that emotion might not always be there, and there should be like an obligation or a discipline, right, in acting out your love.
Yeah.
But you can't divorce those things.
Yeah.
And to add to that, I think that kind of seems consistent with my understanding of the practice of like Catholicism, where it's like it's obligatory in the sense where it's like you should be doing it whether or not you feel it, which is like Protestants feel the same way. But the idea is to get to the point where you're feeling it.
Yes.
Or to feel it. Okay?
Yes.
And I feel like Catholicism puts that secondary.
Gotcha.
Where it's like we're trying to intertwine it all. And maybe like maybe there's a hierarchy there. Like I'm not saying there isn't, but I don't know. Like I haven't come to a conclusion on this. Is all new to me.
Yeah. So and those are fair questions, observations, you name it, right?
Yeah.
And I want
feel free to shut them down right now if you think that's not an accurate depiction.
Well, as you can guess, I don't think it is, right?
Okay, and that's good. I don't think you should.
But I love the fact that we're talking about it.
Yeah.
First thing I would say is, in its history, the Catholic Church is the one that's tried to keep all the aspects of man. So, right, a study of man, anthropology, right? Study of man is a understanding, a conceptualization that conforms with reality of what the human person and the human being is, right? So a proper understanding of man is going to lead up to a proper understanding of what it is that we mean when we talk about love, because man is the subject.
I absolutely agree with that. There are a lot of things I want to add to that. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, so what I want to do is the first thing is, if you have a proper anthropology, then you have a proper understanding not merely of love, but of worship and where love fits into worship, right? And I think that, in the ups and downs of history, there's been a consistent anthropological understanding that has stood the test of time and that has been practiced, although better in some places and worse in others. Does that make sense? Because of human nature.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I think it's important to distinguish between what some specific Christians might say versus the communion that they're a part of. So, for example, if I look at Lutheranism, I'm probably going to read Martin Luther's Small Catechism and his other one. I'm not going to simply portray Lutheranism as what my buddy Bob, who is a Lutheran, has been telling me. Does that make sense? And I know
absolutely.
You know that.
And I'm not even saying that. Like maybe I misunderstood what she was saying. So,
yeah.
But I feel like I beat the horse a little bit to make sure I understood it. So maybe I'm wrong, and maybe that's
with your friend or with
my friend, right?
Okay,
so
yeah.
I'm trying to be as gracious as I possibly can.
Yeah.
And honestly, I was convinced walking out of there. I disagreed, but I was like convinced in the consistency of the position.
Yeah.
And I still kind of am. So
yeah. So another thing I'm going to add is that this actually has a history within the Catholic Church.
Ooh.
So that's something that is really interesting to
What do you mean
about.
by that? Are you saying that this is a common belief, or you...
No, so you brought up the conception of the gifts of the Holy Spirit and of moral obligation, right? You remember saying that?
Yeah, I absolutely do. I'm just making sure we're heading in the right direction here.
Yeah,
I don't want to go down a rabbit hole.
Those are connected to the Christian life, which you say is a life of love of God and neighbor. And I agree wholeheartedly. That is the gospel.
Mm-hmm.
And so this relationship between the movements of the Holy Spirit in the Christian soul and the duties that we have and the obedience that we owe, right, are intimately connected. And there has been a history where they have tended to be separated, and yet through reform have been brought back together.
I like it. I like it a lot.
Yeah.
So can we define love? Is it so? Does the catechism?
I know I beat around the bush. I'm trying to.
Sam is patient. Sam is kind. Sam does not envy. I mean love.
Good one.
I'm just kidding. But so we get that, right? So does the catechism have a definition of love? And I'm saying that because I know there has to be one. I'm making a hard assumption. Can we read that?
Yeah. So let's.
Is that going to knock us off track? Well, I don't know. Maybe I didn't prepare for this, but I didn't read that.
No, you're fine. You're fine. See the way I operate, and we're gonna go read it right now. I promise. But the way I operate is I like to put a bunch of chess pieces on the board, right, until the very end.
You're setting me up.
Exactly.
No. So look, what I want to do though is that I want to.
I'm gonna look it up right now.
Fine.
I think that the vision I'm trying to convey makes more sense if you approach it by understanding all the pieces of the pie, so to speak. Anyway, okay, so here's a catechism. Let me go ahead and Control F. Yeah, that's not going to work there, bud. The word love and the word charity are used so much that it's impossible for me to find it. So
just Google Catechism
well,
definition love.
okay. I don't think we're gonna get it that way.
Word, pun intended.
Because but that's kind of the point. It's so important that it's literally on every page.
Quit being philosophical, Dom. I want to know the definition.
I'm sorry. You want me to give you mine? I mean,
yeah, that would be great.
okay. Let me just try this up. Charity defined.
Charity or love?
Same thing. Well, it's not, but fine. Shut up. I'm just kidding. That's not gonna help us. Yeah, this is a dead end. Let me.
Okay, that's fine.
Let me just work it through with you. Okay, fine. I'll go straight to St. Thomas because I think he has the answer.
I like St. Thomas.
Okay.
Seems like a great guy.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, I'll tell you what, Sam. St. Thomas talks about 4 different words. I know I keep doing this, but this will get us to the definition, okay? He talks about love, dilection, charity, and friendship. So love, delight, or dilection, charity, and friendship. For him, love, the word love, simply means the apprehension and the recognition of a good.
The apprehension and the recognition of a good.
So I see something that in itself is good. And me apprehending that with my mind is an attitude of love. It's a disposition. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I like that a lot.
Okay. Next thing. He talks about desire. So this isn't one of the 4, but he talks about desire, which is what moves us towards the object loved. So
wow. So I just want to plug real quick.
Yeah.
Okay, that she had used the word passion. She's like, what you are.
So I'm going to use that
passion.
word too.
Well, no. So what I came to, I've been thinking about this all day. I wish I wrote more down. Like I was digging a bunch of holes in the yard. Yeah, and so what I came to is that I don't like the word passion.
Yeah.
Because I feel like it implies just raw emotion. It's like uncontrollable. And I don't think that's a fair description at all.
I agree.
What I came to is desire being a better, like more fitting word.
Yeah.
For maybe, because it's like desire has like a direction, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I would argue that desire is more or less freely entered into, not completely, but it's you participate in that,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Passion, I would argue, is maybe not the same.
So-
Passion seems directionless.
It's interesting because you talk about desire being more or less free. So you might have desire that you can't resist, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So think of that as that which directs you towards the object, but that motion, that movement, is not ordered by right reason. You see what I'm saying? So I know this cake.
Wait, so
I shouldn't eat this cake, but I have such a bad habit that I can't say no to myself. So I know it's right, but I don't do it. So that would be a desire that is less free because of the lifestyle I'm living.
yeah, but so couldn't you make that argument for any? And I don't even know how to categorize this, right? But if you too much of a good thing or something that is good but disordered, right, can be sin, right? So if I have a desire, for cake, right? But and you're right, but cake is like also like a lovely, beautiful thing.
Absolutely.
So like I could desire a beautiful woman. So
so that's the other part where we talk about freedom. That's when desire is ordered by right reason. And you
totally agree.
And you basically act on it. That's what moves you towards the good. So really the problem here is, are my desires ordered by right reason or not? Right?
Yeah. And so you're saying that kind of that process needs to be rooted in love, or that process is love?
So love is the initial observation of the goodness of something. And I'm using St. Thomas's words here. So this definition isn't the one that we're going to conclude to. So sorry if that's annoying.
No, that's fine, dude.
But love for St. Thomas is basically the apprehension of the goodness of an object. Desire is your motion towards it. And so now we get to the second word, which was what? Delight or dilection.
Yes.
That's when you enjoy communion with the object. You've reached it. So think of the word dilection. In it you hear election. You've chosen it and have come into communion with it. So now you're delighting in that apprehension that is now one with you. Does that make sense?
I like that. Wait, so in my mind, it's like desire is like dating, and then dilection is like marriage.
Yeah, it's a beautiful way to put it. So love is the observation that things are good and beautiful. Desire is the motion of the soul towards them. Delight is the communion that is being enjoyed. Joy is the fruit of that communion. So delight is the enjoyment, and then joy is like the fruit of that communion. It's a satisfaction that you're at peace and restful now. Does that make sense?
Yeah, how about that?
And finally, he talks about friendship, which gets interesting because he talks about friendship is when you love something. When you love someone, it'd be hard to have a friendship with something, but when you
there's a culture. I'm just kidding.
Friendship is when you love someone and you want what's good for them. So in a certain sense, it's a altruistic love.
I see what you're saying. So I think love has to have like an element of selflessness. So in my mind, right, there has to be. I'm trying to hit specific wickets when I describe in my mind what love is, right, and what the ultimate definition of love is.
Okay.
And I think it needs to imply a sense of selflessness, right? Because ultimately, I'm like, how did Christ love the church? How did Christ love his bride? We'll say, how should I love my bride? There's an element of selflessness in there, where it's like you're willing to give your life. There's nothing more selfless than that, I would argue.
Yeah.
Right.
And so I totally agree. Now, I think this is what might have come up, which is, well, if that's what love is, then it should not be something that's emotional. It should merely be, and I don't agree with this, I'm phrasing it. It should merely be a kind of dry act of the will.
I don't think so.
Yeah. No, I don't either.
Yeah,
but
is
that what came up?
So I don't know that so it was specifically like said that it should be only an act of the will.
Okay.
And then in my mind, right, I might have inferred this, to be fair. But the idea was that the emotion got in the way of one's ability to execute that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Even to the point where something along the lines of like love is more valuable when it's hard was put in. So love is more valuable when the emotion is not there.
I mean, I think we both agree with that.
I don't agree with that at all.
Oh.
It's more valuable? You think it's more valuable when it's hard? I mean, it's harder, like maybe it's harder to do, and it's more, it's definitely more selfless, right, at that point.
Isn't that a higher form of love? Because if it's not selfless, what is it?
Does that make it more valuable? If it's not selfless, that doesn't make it selfish, right?
What does it make it?
I would argue that there's a Likert scale, right? So you could overshoot or you could undershoot, and we
agree that selflessness is a higher good than it not being there.
So I feel like we discussed this when we were talking about tithing, like with Cody weeks ago.
Yeah.
Anyway, my point is,
oh yeah,
it's not like, in my mind, it's not you don't get more credit for doing something that you're doing begrudgingly, right? Just because you desire to do something good doesn't take away from the fact that you're doing something good.
Let me stop you right there.
Feel free to disagree. Yeah.
Well, I disagree that it's begrudgingly. That's the whole point. You want to, even though you don't feel like it. So this points to something interesting.
What if I said you do it even though you don't want to? Would that make it begrudgingly? And how is that different?
I think this is semantic, because the fact that you're doing it means you want to. So there's a distinction here, right? You don't want to. So Aquinas talks about the concupiscible passions and the irascible passions. The concupiscible passions are the ones that seek out a good that is readily available. The irascible passions are those things that help you surmount an obstacle that prevents you from attaining the good that would have otherwise been available. Does that make sense?
So how about this? Would it be, right, so let's put this in the context of Mass, which is ultimately what we were discussing. Mm-hmm. Would you argue that it's more healthy to not want to go to Mass and then do it anyway?
No. I think
But it is a higher good.
no.
It's more, but it is more. It's more selfless.
I think I have something that will help clarify what's going on.
I would really like to be clarified. Yeah.
Yeah. I think you have to start with the beginning. Original innocence.
In the beginning.
So when Adam and Eve lived in Eden, right, before the fall, what you have is a human being without sin. So a human being whose desires are ordered to right reason, right?
Concur.
And so for Adam to till the garden and for Adam to pick the fruit and grow stuff, it wasn't toil. It was pleasant.
Yes.
There was no anxiety, no fear. It was, and the fact that he was naked and not ashamed is also interesting. There's no care. There's no fear of use and abuse, and there's no fear of sin, right? Of dishonesty from other people. It's trust, simplicity, and right reason and order. So laziness is something that doesn't even factor in, as well as selfishness. It doesn't make sense, right? But what happens with the fall is that the passions are no longer ruled by right reason. So here's my question for you, and I think this will help you. Because ultimately when we talk about Eden, we're talking about worship. Remember the way Genesis is set up? Eden is the holy of holies of creation, where God dwells with man, walks in the garden.
Mm-hmm.
So ultimately we are talking about liturgy. We're back at Mass again, right? So here's what's important. Think of original innocence. Did Adam use his emotions in his life? Did he feel joy when he saw Eve?
I imagine yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I felt like that wasn't what you want me to say. That's why I hesitated. Yeah, like, of course he did.
Of course.
Why wouldn't he?
Yeah, because they're part of being human.
And she was naked. What's up? Feel free to delete that. I don't care either way. I'm just kidding.
No, of course he used his emotions, right? It's part of being human. But what you have is this beautiful order, right? I think it's Augustine. He defines peace as the tranquility of order. Peace.
The tranquility. Shoot, I like that a lot.
Right?
That's really nice.
Yeah.
That's peaceful. Some might say.
But what does that
Great
imply?
peace of knowledge.
That implies that all the emotions are directed. They're hierarchically ordered towards what?
Truth.
Towards God. Worship.
Yeah.
So guess what? They're blazing. They're on fire.
And they should be.
Yeah.
And that's awesome.
But they're ordered,
But
which means that you're not slapping someone.
Yeah. I feel you.
So we're agreeing. I want to lead you more. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, so what I'm hearing you say, though, right? So back to my original question, is that if you have to overcome that disorder in your own emotions, then you're committing a more selfless act, which you are saying is more virtuous, which I'm assuming you're saying is more virtuous. You get my beef with that. So maybe I'm misunderstanding.
I don't even get what you're asking.
Okay.
Sorry.
Right. So the argument that I'm understanding.
We're going to. I agree.
I want to agree with you.
Yeah.
I want to hash this out to where we agree because I think.
I think you think we disagree.
No. I disagree with what you said.
Oh really?
Yes.
Oh, earlier to what I just said about Adam.
What you just said about Adam vibes. I like it.
Well. So let me finish. I think this will help.
Okay.
That was part A.
Part A.
Part B is that we have this. So the Christian story, right? The Christian worldview, the understanding of reality, is original innocence, order, and peace. Sin introduces chaos, disorder, and lack of obedience, even within ourselves. If you have the narrative, the Christian narrative in mind, right? What you have is after the disorder, right? What you have is the reordering, or what we call the new creation, which is redemption, right? Now that redemption isn't merely we're not going to fix man's emotions, but simply declare him as good to go because Christ is ordered. No, it's man is incorporated by election, which is love, free love, right? So nothing you can do to merit it. God sees man as good. and chooses him, right? And what he does when he does that is that he incorporates us into his body, which is what? It's not just divine, it's a human body too, with emotions. Christ had emotions.
Yes.
Right? And so what happens in redemption is that our disordered emotions they're reordered. But how are they reordered? How did Christ redeem us? What was the thing that happened? The pinnacle of it, because his whole life redeems us. But what is it that represents that salvific covenant ratifying act in the life of Christ that represents our redemption and affects it?
Yeah, and that's actually a sweet transition into another point I wanted to make about love existing in vulnerability. So crucifixion, right, is ultimately the pinnacle of, I don't know, everything you just said, right? The sacrifice.
But crucifixion, why?
Because it redeemed us.
Yeah, resurrection. So it's in what? The point
Wasn't
is
the resurrection as opposed to the crucifixion, you think? It was like the act of love?
You can't separate them.
Okay, fair enough. All right,
Yeah.
we're good.
So the idea here is that the renewal of the cosmos, the new creation, takes place through a death to the man of concupiscence, the threefold concupiscence of 1 John 2:16. If you want to look it up, you don't have to.
Should we read that?
Yeah, let's read that. Let me go ahead and look it up real quick. So 1 John 2:16 says, "For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, and the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, is not of the Father, but is of the world." So this has come to be called the threefold concupiscence. So the fall introduces a disorder. Think of a wrench. This is a bad example. You might find a better one than me.
I love bad examples.
If it's bent, right, it's not good enough to put it back straight, because it'll kind of return a little bit to
Like the flour, when you gobble up a flour and then like straighten it out. You ever heard that before?
No, but
it's like not exactly the same. It'll never be the same.
Yeah. So in a certain sense, there has to be, you kind of have to overcompensate, but not too much, right? In order for it to remain straight. So the idea being here is that we're so profoundly disordered by sin, right? And sometimes we don't realize how much. And that's even part of sin, is the darkening of our mind, of our intellect, where we like to lie to ourselves, right? We don't realize how utterly pathetic we are and wounded and disordered in very awful ways that cry out for redemption and for grace, and that we absolutely need that. And there's nothing we can do to get ourselves out of that. It requires a free gift of God's love. And so what that does, though, is that once it takes root and it is received and lived out, it transforms us into Christ. So what that means is that it's going to be painful, right? That's why Paul says in Romans 8 that the Spirit is groaning for the sake of the redemption of the body. Let me look that one up too. Okay, I'll just read this. I think it's beautiful.
Read it.
Okay,
Spit
here it
that
is.
knowledge.
So in chapter 8 of the Epistle to the Romans, Paul says, "I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed to us. For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not of its own will, but by the will of him who subjected it in hope." Who do you think that is?
God.
Let's try.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Who
I'll reread
subjected it to...
Yeah, I just discovered this recently, so it's not obvious. I had no idea who the subject of that verb was until recently.
Would it be Eve?
No, I don't think so.
Well, I mean, who subjected it to futility?
Yeah, I think Adam. I can explain.
Letting her...
Are you saying because Eve is the one who kind of started the thing?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying.
It goes back to Adam being the head. Verse 20 says, "For the creation was subjected to futility, not of its own will, but by the will of him who subjected it in hope." So I think that verse refers to Adam, because in Romans 5, Paul pits Adam and Christ against each other as through one sin entered the world, and through the other righteousness and grace.
Interesting.
And so, because Adam was created first, he's the head of humanity. He's the origin, you might say.
Mm-hmm.
And so here it says, so for the creation was subjected to futility. So notice how the ground was cursed after Adam sinned.
Yes.
So think of it this way. Were there thorns and thistles before the sin?
Hard negative.
I think there were.
Stop.
So think of the
Wait, seriously?
Absolutely. Think of the consequences of saying there weren't. Does that mean that God creates twice, and one time he creates evil?
It's not evil. He created toil.
Toil is when it's hard to work because your passions are not ordered. So it's a negation of the good. The Hebrew scriptures ascribe the presence of evil in the cosmos to man, not God. So in a certain sense, when God punishes, what he's doing is he's allowing man's own undoing. So the idea that thorns and thistles were created in order to punish man has kind of a Manichaean aspect to it, in the sense where God creates twice, and once out of wrath, not out of love. But what does John 3:16 say? God so loved the world, right? So anything evil does not come from God, it comes from man. So that being said, since thorns and thistles exist, they're good, what makes them evil is how we perceive them. So the way we perceive things is extremely important. So if I am before the sin in Eden gardening, I want to, because my passions and my emotions are all ordered to right reason, and this is the right thing to do because I love God. And I want to do it, both feel to do it and want to do it, because I don't have any sin. I'm happy. There's no toil in the sense of hard, cursed toil that you see after. And so the world was created only once. But when Adam sinned, then, because of the disorder of his passions, he saw that he was naked, vulnerable. He saw that it was hard to toil, because now he's lazy. But he has to survive. So fear, all these things, the way he sees the world changed, and therefore he subjects it to futility. But why in hope? Because in Genesis 3:15, God promises that he will rescue man, and that the seed of the woman will crush the head of the serpent. So I think this is a commentary on Genesis. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
Well,
So
I
it's
mean,
not-
mostly, I'm not going to split hairs about the whole thorn thing. We can talk about that offline.
Yeah, I mean, God created the world. Thorns are creatures in that sense, right? Created things.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, they're good, and God created a good world. Therefore, God created thorns. Now, they're evil because
Couldn't thorns and thistles just be like a disorder of like plant life, right?
No, because first of all, they have medicinal properties, which is a positive thing. But also, you don't really understand.
Medicinal properties of thistle?
Yeah, thistle has medicinal properties.
Really?
Mhm.
Oh, like milk thistle?
I don't know. I just discovered this.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What about thorns? What's the...
They so in the way that not fauna, flora, right? Flora is plant life, fauna is animal life.
Mm-hmm.
But in the way the ecosystem of the fauna works, flora, I did it again. Everything kind of through the process of natural selection and the ecosystem, everything has some kind of role. Even fire ants, believe it or not. Now, I can't fully explain that, and then when science can't come to know that this has a proper role, then
we're going down a rabbit hole. I see what you're saying, though.
I'm just saying,
Yeah,
like,
that's fair.
God didn't create twice. Like,
Yeah.
the stuff that we have is the stuff God created. You can't separate that. That would be a heretical in the eyes of the Jews themselves, as well as the early Christians. So it is kind of an argument by authority, I'll grant you that. But it's consistent. God creates once. Anyway. So let me finish this passage.
That's fair, yeah.
Yeah. I'll just finish this passage, though. Verse 22. We know that the whole creation has been groaning in travail together until now. And not only the creation, but we ourselves, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, groan inwardly as we wait for adoption as sons, the redemption of our bodies. For in this hope we were saved. Now hope that is seen is not hope, for who hopes for what he sees? But if we hope for what we do not see, we wait for it with patience. So what we see here is Paul's inaugurated eschatology. The point being is that through the redemption that Christ has secured once and for all, now in the life of the church, it unfolds and transforms and redeems us. Does that make sense? That redemption plays out. And how does it play out? Through the groaning of the Spirit, because we have received the first fruits. So this is talking about the life of the Spirit in us to do what? To take those disordered passions and to align them back again so that man can be fully directed towards God and not what? Idols. Disordered passions, the expression of that is idolatry.
Yeah, fair.
Yeah. So what happens when you are fully in line and directed towards God, passions are more fully themselves and more fully human, which means that we're talking about anthropology here. And the man fully alive, as Irenaeus tells us from the early 2nd century.
As John Eldridge said.
Not early, mid-2nd to late 2nd century. Irenaeus says, the man fully alive is the glory of God. That's worship. So everything needs to be in tune. So how do we know what to do to tune in all those emotions? So that's why love is a process, and that's why it's more meritorious ultimately for the end goal to continue to love even when you don't feel like it. But because what does that do? It realigns your passions to right reason.
Negative.
But that's not the end goal. The end goal is that once they're realigned, then they're on fire and fully directed towards God. That's better than worship. Do you see what I'm saying?
I completely agree, but I feel like that's contrary to what you said before, because you said it's more virtuous.
It has to do with Paul's inaugurated eschatology. The eschaton is not here. It will be better. But when we're talking about historical man and not the man of the new heavens and the new earth, then for us here until the eschaton, it is more meritorious to love without feeling. But ultimately, it will be better to love with ordered feelings. And we can even experience that here if we let the Spirit, purify us enough. We can get to that point. But that's why the process is the historical process. So the distinction here is that love is more meritorious in history for man if he's doing it without the feelings, because that is the work of the Spirit in redeeming him. But once he is in the eschaton, then that is much more perfect than a love without emotion.
But you said we could do that here on earth. Our feelings could be aligned in a godly way toward the act of love.
Yes.
But that would not be as virtuous still.
I think it would be, yes.
Is that not contrary to what you just said?
No, because I'm talking about the process versus the so we're talking about mystical theology, right? The fact that you start by purifying your senses, and then after that you start purifying your will, and then after that you come into union with God. So this has been the Christian tradition since Pseudo-Dionysius, which was a great Christian mystic in the history of the church, where because of the process of sanctification, right? Then it's more meritorious during that process to not have those feelings and yet persevere. But what is most perfect is when those disordered passions are ordered and being expressed with the will, all in unison, man fully alive, as Irenaeus said. That is more perfect. But in the process, if the process is not complete, then what do you need? Work.
So are you saying that you can be fully sanctified well on earth?
I'm saying...
I don't know that I would disagree with that. I'm not trying to bait you.
Yeah, I'm saying that union with God here on earth is possible, basically becoming a saint, right? In the sense where your will is fully in accord with God. But
and that is manfully alive.
Yeah.
So
that's ratified.
That is achieved.
I think so. It's possible through grace for man to be.
Sure, I agree.
Yeah.
So unless you're at the pinnacle, you're at self-actualization, right?
Yeah.
You're at man fully alive.
Yes.
Unless you are there, it is more virtuous to love without feeling.
Yeah. What?
I don't know if I like that. I see what you're saying.
No.
I mean, I don't like it, but I see what you're saying. It's consistent.
Well, I think I want to add something to it.
Go for it.
It's more virtuous if you're talking about feelings that haven't been purified. So, when we're talking about man fully alive, he's reached union with God, then all of the aspects of his nature have been purified, right? And he's blasting on full cylinders, right?
Sure.
But it doesn't mean that during that process, some of his emotions have been purified and are in right order. Others need work, right? And so it's better for man to have those rightly ordered emotions blasting. It's more excellent because he's being integrated piece by piece.
Totally agree.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is that in the state of sin, purification is something that brings more merit. But the goal is, you're right, a more excellent place, which is the redemption of the body, which ultimately we see in the resurrection. So it's not a contradiction. We have a kind of a tension here. And ultimately, I've agreed with you since the beginning of this episode.
It's not necessarily a contradiction. It's because it's consistent. Like I said, I just don't.
I don't
it doesn't
understand.
make sense to me. I don't know. Right? So it's like.
What I'm saying is that when you worship God,
yes,
like it should be your entire being that is worshiping God. So in the Second Vatican Council, there was a call for deeper, active participation in the liturgy. Now, some have construed that the wrong way after the council, and they started riding motorcycles up to the altar.
I don't get the reference.
No, it's not a reference. It's ridiculous is what it is. A priest riding a motorcycle up to the altar.
Did that happened historically?
Yes.
That is the reference that I do not get. I didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah.
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 I don't know.
And so, in other words, like more active participation, people are like, heck yeah, let's do it. And they start bringing, they start playing Metallica at Mass, shaking their heads. Like active participation, remember disordered desire versus a desire that is conformity with what God wants for our own good. And so what that looks like is full intentional participation, singing, right? Spiritually.
But that is man fully alive, is what you're saying. It's full active participation in worship.
Absolutely. Yeah, of course.
Totally agree. But if you're not there, if you're not at that point, it's better to have no desire because it's more meritorious to love without desire.
So I think this is where we're talking past each other. It's better to have no disordered desire. But that's an important distinction.
I don't understand
it's always
that it is.
better to have desire. Always. If it's ordered. Always. If it's disordered, it's better to be in a kind of spiritual desert because that'll help the ordering of desire. You see that?
That actually kind of makes sense.
That's all I'm saying.
I guess what I don't understand is how could desire for God be disordered?
Because it could be the kind of it can be selfish, right? So think of this, right? Let's say I hang out with someone because they make me laugh, right? Nothing wrong with that, right? It's a great thing.
It sounds like disordered desire.
Well,
I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
I think it is because it's not disordered. It becomes disordered if like the moment they stop making you laugh and they've become kind of, I don't know, let's say depressed or something. And you're like, well, I mean, this is not fun hanging out with you anymore. So you stop. What was the purpose for hanging out with them in the first place?
Well, it's still important to love people in those times, right? But all I'm saying, right, is that to enjoy somebody's company and hang out with them is not less meritorious. I don't like the word meritorious because I'm Protestant, but like is less meritorious than loving somebody when you don't want to be around them. That's what you're saying, right? Or am I wrong?
I thought I gave you the
Do you need me to rephrase that?
I agree with you. Like, I thought the distinction I gave you made sense of that. It's more meritorious to be with someone than not to be in the process of loving. Absolutely agree. What I'm talking about is whether desire is ordered or not. That's why sometimes separation and dryness is important because of disorder. It's always medicinal. It's never for its own purpose.
So I don't disagree with you about it, the dryness like not being important. That is important, right? So if you're married to somebody, it's important to love them in those gaps when you're not experiencing the overwhelming emotion to do so.
Yeah.
I'm arguing that it's not more meritorious. Otherwise, you should desire those times because they're more meritorious or they're more sanctifying, right? So maybe I should desire. Desire is clearly a charged word here, but I would be, if I wanted to be more sanctified in my marriage, I would want to remove all emotion from it. And that seems ridiculous to me. Or I'm misunderstanding something.
So what I would say is that as long as you understand that you never seek out suffering for its own sake, that's called masochism, right? But if you know that suffering can make you more pleasing to the person who loves you, then I think there is such a thing as a holy desire to seek out that which makes you more pleasing. So think of it this way. If I the harder the challenge, so this gets us to romance. I want to talk about romance soon. But the harder the challenge, right, and then you accomplish it through all the trial and difficulty. So we're talking about Aquinas' irascible passions.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get to that union after that trial, the reward is much greater. So what's in mind is never suffering for its own sake. It's always for the reward, which is much greater. And so there's a certain sense in which you can desire trial in light of what it will ultimately yield, which is a more fruitful harvest. That's how you can desire trial. But if you're desiring it for its own sake because, this is better, like that's disorder. It's called masochism. It's wrong. It's sinful.
But you're saying it's better.
What's better?
You said, obviously we should not desire it because it's better. But you're implying then that it's better.
You're desiring suffering not
it's not
for
about
its
desire.
own sake.
Let's say, but it's not about desire, right? Let's remove desire.
What's better isn't the trial. What's better is the fruits that the trial produced. Yeah, you're talking past me. We are agreeing, Sam, that you desire the trial not for its own sake. That's the point. It's not the trial you're desiring, but it is a necessary component of the fruits that you're desiring, which will be greater if the trial is greater. So if you look at the history of Christianity, all the mystics and all the holy people who...
Honestly, that kind of makes sense.
Who followed Christ, right? What some of them would say, Christ, praying to Jesus, they would say, make things tough for me so I can prove that I love you. And so when I am redeemed and in communion with you, I can say, this is what I did for you. So, for example, Peter Damian left, he was a missionary, and he basically set camp on an island full of lepers.
Very different implications there.
Very different. And he decided to spend the rest of his life living in that poverty with the lepers, right? Not a very pleasant life. Ultimately, he got leprosy and died. But he cared for them for a long time and served them as if they were Jesus Christ himself. And in that trial, he proved his love. And I'll tell you what, this guy was on fire for Christ. His emotions were booming for Jesus Christ. But it took on a very specific form, which is the form of the cross. So, bringing it back to worship, though, maybe that's where you want to go. Or maybe you want to talk more about love. So love, right, the perfect love will be a love that is fully emotional, but emotions that are rightly ordered. So emotions, you cannot get rid of them. You need them because you're human. You absolutely need them. And that's why Irenaeus, he says it's man fully alive, not man willfully directed towards God only. He doesn't say that. He says fully. Every single aspect of his nature, everything. His heart should be throbbing.
So, honestly, that makes a lot of sense. But where I'm lost is that I feel like, right, if we're gonna bring the word merit into this, then it's like being at firing at 50%, like half of your cylinders, we'll say.
Yeah.
You're closer to where you should be. You're more ordered.
Totally agree.
That should be more meritorious.
It is.
You said it wasn't. Specifically.
You're undoing the distinction, right? It's more meritorious. But if you're at the Mass or the Protestant worship, and that 50% that's on fire is for selfish reasons, or at least there's a little bit of selfishness there, right? That aspect, that disorder is not perfect. If it was ordered, it'd be better. It'd be better than the absence of emotion. You're just doing it because dang it, I love God and I don't have to feel like it.
That's an important distinction, and I feel like
it is.
I feel like if you'd have drawn that out, like I would have agreed with you from the very beginning. Right?
I thought we agreed from the very beginning, and I was surprised why you're pushing back because I agree with you. But that distinction does kind of make sense of the.
So let's draw this out real quick.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is a disordered emotion is worse than having no emotion at all.
Of course.
So I agree with you.
Yeah. When it comes to when it comes to the act of love, right? Which ultimately begins with the will, but it needs all the rightfully ordered emotions because you're a human, you're not a will, right?
So is it ones and zeros for you? You're either fully alive, or you have disordered emotion.
No, it's a process. It's messy.
So I could be closer to 100%.
Yeah.
Right? Without being disordered.
If you're closer and not at 100%, then there's still disorder. You got to work on that. But
it's ones and zeros.
No, because those ordered emotions are incorporated into your worship. You got to.
So having mostly,
you're either too close to the mic or too far.
I'm sorry.
I'm so sorry.
So again, I'm going to ask.
Okay.
Is it ones and zeros?
No.
You're either manfully alive. You either have complete ordered emotions, or it's better to have no emotions at all.
No, because there's such a state as where you have parts of your soul that are ordered and other parts that are disordered.
That was literally my argument from the beginning. I feel like, right? So it's like if I'm 50%,
I was agreeing with you since the very beginning.
There,
I agree with you I have not disagreed with you in this whole time.
That was not clear to me. That was not.
I was trying to make it clear. I've been agreeing with you since the very beginning. I'm kind of confused.
So what did you mean when you said it's not, or it's better to have no emotion at all than to have
disordered emotions?
I feel like that's not what you said from the beginning. My understanding from what you said from the beginning was that it's better to have no emotion at all unless you are fully alive.
So in the beginning of the conversation,
in my mind, it's like if your desire to be there, right?
I can explain.
Why wouldn't that be more meritorious than you going and not wanting to be there?
Yeah, it is. So the reason why you said
it's more sanctified.
I was focusing on a very specific aspect, which is the fact that we begin as disordered, right? But in the process of after grace, after receiving God's redemption, now we're talking about something different. We're talking about a process of sanctification which involves both suffering and dryness, as well as the light that is purely oriented towards God, right? Non-selfish, altruistic love. And that involves emotion. So that I didn't make the distinction at first because we didn't get so deep into the weeds. So it could have came off as, kind of black and white. But I those distinctions are made by St. Thomas. And by Pseudo Dionysius. But yeah, I mean, I began the conversation by saying, dryness produces purification, and that purification results in ordered emotions that are fully on fire towards God. Yeah.
Eventually. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But if you're 50% along that process, is it more meritorious to act in that manner?
The means are for the goal. If the goal is reached in those areas, then it's more meritorious to live that out. That would be masochism to not do that. Yeah.
Explain that again.
So let me maybe if I can give you an example. Let's say my relationship with my brother, right? Let's say I've attained a situation where I want what's best for him. I really do. And when something goes wrong in his life, I feel sad. I feel upset because I love that person. I love my brother, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, and so out of that love, which is an act of the will, but it's also the sadness that accompanies it, because I'm not, this dissectable creature. I'm a whole human being. And so you can't really separate these things in reality, only conceptually, right? So that sadness and that love that comes from both my will and my rightfully ordered emotion, which is caused by the love I have for my brother, will lead me to say, let's say he's on the streets. None of them are, okay? Let's say he's on the streets. And I say, look, come live with me. I own a house in this hypothetical scenario. Nice. I say, come live with me, right? Now, compare that to, I don't really like my brother, but I have an obligation because he's family. And so I found out that he's in dire circumstances.
Yep.
And I don't want him to move in, but I have an obligation. So I say, yeah, come on, you can move in. The first one is more meritorious.
Bro, totally agree with you.
Yeah, I've never disagreed with that.
So
now here's a third.
So I have a quote.
Well, here's a third case. And then give me that quote.
Okay.
Because I think this is important. The third case is where my brother actually, let's just say I'm a druggie, right? And he has a lot of cocaine. This is an awful example, okay?
I see where you're going with this.
Yeah.
So it's a disordered desire for your brother to want to live with you.
Because I can get cocaine.
You're right. That was a terrible example. No. I see what you're saying. So right, like,
Yeah.
so. But what I said was.
Wait, last thing. I think we underestimate the depth of the disorder in our souls and how much we need Christ. We underestimate.
Not unfair. Go
ahead.
But what I said was, love is more valuable when it's hard. And you agreed with that.
I do still agree, because the idea here is that hardness does not equal no emotion, right? It's not an equivalence there. Something, you can be deeply in love with someone, and because they're suffering, it's literally causing you to lose your hair, but there's all your emotions are poured out into the welfare of that person, as well as your mind and will. Like, your entire being is directed towards the good, but it's painful and it's hard, and so you're meriting more.
How about this? Love is more important when there's a lack of emotion. Agree or disagree?
Again, if it's ordered emotion, disagree. If it's disordered, agree.
I feel like we could have skipped the last half hour if you'd have just said that.
I think there was some.
I'm not blaming you. I'm not blaming you. There was a lot of really good stuff.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I came in with this preconception that we were disagreeing, and I'm not sure why.
I realized that, and I kept telling you, Sam, we're agreeing. Yeah.
Yeah. Eventually, the last 5 minutes.
No, I remember the conversation began, and I said I agree with you, and literally the whole time, it felt like you were pushing back, and I was confused because I agree with you.
Yeah, we'll hit it. I mean, I'll re-listen to it later, and we'll see. I'll see where
you don't trust
where
me.
I misunderstood.
No, that's cool. No, I agree with you. I really do. And so I think so maybe where the Catholic Protestant thing might come in here, that might be helpful, is that it's important to realize that we are not the ones who determine how to love our spouse. Love is by its nature altruistic, right? And so if my wife says to me, I'm single, by the way, any young Catholic ladies listening to the love... Okay, I don't know about that. No, so the thing is, like, if my wife explains to me that she feels abandoned when I don't show affection to her when I get back from work, let's say.
Yes.
Right? But if she also says that when I do little things like take the garbage out, she feels extremely valued and loved. If I start showing my love for her in ways that are not the ones that she verbalized and communicated with me, but I'm buying her flowers, right? I made dinner, but turns out she loves to make dinner. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so what we have here is that the authority when it comes to love is the other. You see that?
Ooh, I like that a lot.
Yeah. What does St. Paul say in Ephesians? Be subject to each other mutually in the fear of the Lord. The authority is the other. It's all about the other person, always. And so desire is disordered when it's about me.
Yeah. So Jordan Peterson actually says that, like, you should be training your spouse, but in the same way, you should ask them and facilitate them training you.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like you need to understand kind of what, and do it slowly, a little bit at a time. But like you need to understand kind of what they're looking for in out of the relationship and facilitate that to the max extent possible.
Yeah.
But I guess my only beef with this whole thing, right, has been just because I want to and I desire to do that doesn't take away from me doing it.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah. Then So in the same way, right, I feel like my desire to want to go to church or my desire to want to go to Mass
is a beautiful, wonderful, amazing thing.
yes, and doesn't take away from the merit of me doing it.
Absolutely not.
Okay, then maybe I misunderstood the conversation that I had last night.
I'll put it to you this way. It goes back to...
That's how I walked away from it.
Yeah. I'll put it back to you. I'll say something else, right? It goes back again to the fact that we underestimate the level of woundedness that we have, right? And so what might come about through going to worship Christ on Sunday, even if I don't feel like it, is a purification of that woundedness, which can result in a deeper, more beautiful desire eventually on the other side.
So I agree with you, but I feel like I need to caveat that by rejecting your inference of love being altruistic.
I don't understand.
Because there's no way to have an ordered emotion toward loving Christ without understanding that you're getting something out of the deal. Without understanding that it's best for you.
So I would disagree with that, because St. Paul says in Galatians that if him being damned and not being united to God could unite those that he preached to God, that he would accept that willingly. And also, when he says that, he's actually hearkening back to Moses when he's talking with God and the golden calf debacle. Debacle. And so there's a sense in which love does reach a point where it's completely disinterested. But the irony is that that's where you find peace.
Interesting. How would that relate to like a husband-wife relationship, you think?
So I want to caveat that with the fact that, because of sin, spousal relationships are extremely difficult. And I'm not talking from experience. I'm talking from some of the stuff I've been reading, especially St. John Paul II. But so what that means is that, ultimately it's like the saint, right? The one who reaches union with God and he's fully alive and the glory of God, as Irenaeus says. That's probably not going to happen for most of us. We need to continue to not reject God's free gift of himself. Okay, I'm going down a tangent. For spousal life, it means you want to develop more and more an attitude where it's about her happiness. But you can't give what you don't have. And in order to reach that point, it's like saying, you know what, I'm going to starve myself so she can eat more or something. You're not going to be able to feed her when you're dead.
Yeah, you got to put your own mask on before you assist others.
So everything that you do for yourself is always ultimately should be in light of how I can do it for others. That's why I take care of me. That's why you need to be loved in order to love maturely. You can't, if you're not loved or have lacked love, you're not going to be able to love others. You're going to have deep wounds that will prevent you from maturely loving others. But the reason why you need that love, ultimately, right, what's the teleology of the fulfillment of one's needs is always so I can give myself. Always.
Absolutely.
And that's where you find true happiness in complete self-disinterested love. That's literally what God is. That's why the incarnation shows us God's nature in history through a gift of life to us.
Yeah, I think
by
we're
life
talking
itself.
past each other a little bit because I see what you're saying. Yeah, no, because I completely agree with you, right? But in my mind, it's like it can't be completely altruistic. I just don't like the word altruistic. The word altruistic seems so like absolute to me, right? So you ended that with this is how you achieve
you can't
complete
love
happiness
unless you're loved. But the goal is not to be loved, but to love.
Yes.
That's it.
Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah.
Nice.
But think of this, though. Life itself died so that we could have life. Love itself, the Word, spoke its last word in the silence of death. And that's where it revealed to us who he was.
That's an interesting caveat because I did want to talk about the relationship between love and vulnerability. Right? So I have a few thoughts on this.
Yeah.
This one's kind of old, but the first one I have is that
Also had some comments on romanticism, but anyway, go ahead.
I'm interested. That'll
Yeah.
be good. The first one is that to truly love somebody is to understand their vulnerabilities. And not in an essence that you want to like fix all those vulnerabilities, right? But it's like you want to, those gaps is more or less where you're able to love somebody,
Yeah.
right? So the more vulnerable somebody is, the more I would argue you're able to love them.
There's more opportunity, yeah.
Yeah, definitely more opportunity. And I'm like trying to, so in my mind, like as I'm saying this, I think about like a mother and a child, right?
Yeah.
So the child is like,
or someone who's poor, right?
yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think the child is the perfect example, which is literally the analogy used in the Gospels.
yeah.
For us in relationship to the Father. But go ahead.
Which is weird, right? Because you think about, so the first thing I want to say is, so first of all, to love somebody is to be wholehearted, is to be vulnerable, right? So you have to reciprocate in an essence where you have to show somebody you have to bring those walls down in order to truly love somebody, right? And
Yeah.
you think about how we don't even know our own hearts. You don't even understand like the core of your own vulnerability.
Mm.
But Christ does, and he still loves us more than anybody else
Yeah.
is able to love us. So you look at like the things that people are afraid of, right? Death being one. I think actually before death is public speaking. So the number one thing is public. What's more vulnerable than that? You think about the stereotypical like nightmare that people have. You're on stage and then you realize you're naked.
Yeah.
That's vulnerability compounded with vulnerability, right? So all the way back to Genesis, where it's like, boom, we have original sin now, right? Sin has entered the world. We understand our vulnerability. We're naked, and we need to cover that up. We need to hide that from God. God walks into the garden. Hey, where are you?
What are we afraid
I hid
of?
because I was naked.
Yeah.
You hid from God, bro. Come on. You know what I'm saying? He
We're afraid.
understands that
Yeah.
vulnerability. Yeah, it's fear. That's all it is.
What does Jesus repeat often? Don't be afraid.
Don't be afraid.
He reaches down, even though we're in sin. But that's something else about nakedness. The body is, so the human being, when he's created on earth in time and space, he takes on two different incarnations. Carnem in Latin means flesh, so infleshments. And what are those two infleshments?
Man and woman.
Yeah. Masculinity and femininity.
Yin and yang.
But what does that mean, though?
Chaos and order.
When we say I've been doing some thinking on that, and you're not going to like this, but I kind of disagree with Jordan Peterson.
Oh, you take that back.
Yeah.
No, we can talk about that later.
Well, about the idea that the feminine is chaos, because I think that he's getting that a lot more from the pagan myths than he is from the Jewish myth. But that's a
different.
Yeah.
So we can talk about that later.
But I think it does tie into what I'm trying to say
I'm
now.
gonna come armed to fight you about that one.
But what I'm trying to say now is that what we see in the body is the forness, for the otherness. Masculinity can only be understood in relation to femininity, and vice versa. And so what the body shows is that...
But they both exist, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of weird, right? Because you would look at like dark and light, hot and cold, joy and sorrow.
Mm-hmm.
Those things don't. One is a lack of the other. So I wonder if that applies, right? So darkness doesn't really exist. It's just a lack of light.
Yeah. The difference here is that femininity is not a lack.
Yeah, exactly.
Of
So that's what I was
masculinity.
gonna. They both exist. I don't know if that applies or if that matters.
Yeah, they cannot be conceived as not tending towards unity. Right? Light and darkness cannot be conceived as tending towards unity because they're opposites.
They're opposites. Yeah.
Yeah. But masculinity and femininity, right? It's written on the body. The very purpose is unity.
Exactly. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. But what does that show, though, about gender? It shows that the human person is shown forth by the body. So the body expresses the person. And what is God? A communion of persons. And what is man? Created in the image of the communion of persons, whose body shows forth
exactly
that order, that teleology. In other words, man is a gift. His body says that. And so what does that mean? That our very nature is to be, sorry for the word, altruistic. But that's only possible, of course, if we're fed. Because you can't give yourself if you're in a tomb.
Yeah, you got to clean your room first, bud.
But it goes for spiritually
you
as
your
well.
Life, yeah, before you can invest into others.
Yeah, you spiritually as well. You need to be nourished.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the goal...
It's a good thing my cup overfloweth. I'm just kidding.
But yeah, so the very nature of man is that he is a gift. And you see this in his body.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. Man is a gift.
And you see it in his body. Yeah, I feel like I kind of want to understand the implications of vulnerability.
You don't want to talk about liturgy? I'm just kidding. No.
Well, so I actually wanted to talk about sex.
Okay, let's do that. I've been studying that last semester.
Oh, in school. Okay, that's
in school.
Good,
yeah,
like,
no.
No, I'm just kidding.
In school.
No, so
yeah.
I think you kind of addressed my concerns when we talked about the implications of doing something without emotion.
Yeah.
Right. It's better to have
emotion is good. It's beautiful. It's necessary. It's you can't divorce it from man.
So option A is that I either misunderstood the conversation last night or I was right. No, I'm just kidding.
I think that both of you, you're talking about not the conversation with me, right?
No, absolutely not.
Yeah. What's going on is that sometimes we forget to distinguish between the fact that, but we forget to distinguish between the man of original innocence and then the man of original sin. And whether we're talking about the one or the other is going to have huge implications on how we think about this. And so keeping both in mind is crucial to understanding the proper role of emotion in the human person.
Couldn't agree more.
Cool. Good night.
Yeah, how good is that? That's nice. So this is what, I mean, ideally we can, come into this from two different angles and kind of combine forces in the end. That'd be great.
Yeah.
We could continue that.
Let's do it.
Yeah. I just want to say for the listeners that when we talk in circles and don't come to an agreement, typically we just don't publish that.
There's also many conversations that we have where we end up yelling at each other but we don't record it. And then we're like, you know what? We should have recorded that. No.
Record Dom crying at the end. No, I'm just kidding. So what are the implications of Christ having to assume some level of vulnerability in order to properly love us?
Yeah. Oh man.
Is that a weird thing to say, properly love us? Because I feel like he could love us anyway. Obviously, he's God. It doeseth what it wanteth.
Aquinas addresses this too, but that's such a big topic. But
hey, well, maybe we'll hit that another day. But like, I do think that's fascinating. There's like a Taoist saying. Am I talking too close to the microphone? Or?
No, you're good right now.
Okay. Yeah, there's like this Taoist saying where it's like the usefulness of the pot. I'm butchering this, pun intended. The usefulness of the pot has to do with the emptiness inside of it. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a pot, right?
Interesting.
Yeah. So it's like kind of those gaps are where I've said this before, but those gaps are where you're able to more effectively love somebody.
Yeah.
Right. So I had it was a Catholic couple that I actually lived with for a little while back in flight school.
That. Yeah.
And so I tell the story a lot actually. There was a time where like the hot water went out.
Mm-hmm.
And his wife was sick, buddy of mine. His birthday was yesterday, actually. I should probably hit him up. His wife was sick, and the hot water was out. So he actually, like, pot by pot, boiled water and drew a bath for her.
Wow.
Yeah, and we were talking about it later, and I was explaining to her, I was like, guys, I think, actually like when, I don't want to say their spouse is sick, more or less, but it's like, we like when there is a vulnerability that we can
a chance to prove our valor.
Yeah, we can insert our love into.
This is a
you know
great
what I'm saying?
segue into
It
romance.
really is. Yeah.
But go ahead
Is romance going to be another episode, you think?
if you want.
I don't know.
I don't have much to say on it. Just a couple cool tidbits.
What do you got, bud?
Well, you have more? I mean,
no. I just feel like there's.
I like that. I think let's do an episode just on the idea of vulnerability, because I have a lot to say about that, especially from Scripture.
Yeah, we can do that. We hammer out love.
Dude, this and
Honestly, I feel like there's so much more we could say on this topic.
yeah. Let me just add this real quick. The idea of romance, right? And so think of like the idea of that you fall in love. That's actually that's something that came out of Christianity. It's new. The idea of romantic love began in the 17th century. Isn't that crazy?
I hate that.
Why?
It should be intertwined with love.
What?
I say it should be intertwined with love. I feel like again we're trying to divorce emotion from love. We never discussed that even.
Okay, I don't understand what you're saying, but I think maybe I do. Are you saying that you don't like that it's so late in history?
Yeah.
Oh, well, I mean, it's history. Tough. Okay, what I'm trying to say, though, is that it came in the 7th century, but the origins of the idea of romantic love is interesting because it starts with the word, which basically, when the Roman Empire was slowly falling, the Gauls would speak a kind of mix between their native language and the language of the Romans who were occupying them. And eventually the Gauls were conquered by the Franks, but that language was called Romanus.
Romanus.
And so it meant like contemporary, what's the word? Not vulgar, but it's where we get the idea of lingua franca.
If I knew what that meant, maybe I could help you out.
Common tongue.
Oh, okay.
I don't know, dude, but so it meant like average talk.
Slang.
Average, not that bad, like more like just regular English as opposed to high English, you might say.
Okay, yeah.
And so it became
Layman's terms.
Yeah, there you go.
Just kidding.
And so anyway, the point being though is that that's where you get the idea of for novels, right? In French, you say un roman, a Roman. That's what a novel is called.
Interesting.
Now, novels were written. They were stories of the feats of knights in the Middle Ages. So the word that used to mean common tongue came to mean a book about a story in the common tongue about the feats of knights. You see that transition?
Yeah.
And so then what happened is that because knights swore oaths of allegiance to their lords and also to the ladies of the lords. And so the lady of the castle would have her faithful knights who swore oaths of fealty or faithfulness to her. And there was a mutual relationship of love that wasn't marriage. And so these stories had to do with the feats that these knights would accomplish out of faithfulness for the lady of the Lord, for the lady to whom he had sworn an oath of faithfulness. And that became connected to the concept of marriage in the 17th century, where the one who does the feats that will win the heart of the one he swore his faithfulness to ends up becoming his wife. And the idea of courtship came out of that. It's because the knights and the lady, because of that mutual affection that they were bound by, it was in the courts that it happened. And so courtship comes out of that too. And so romantic love and courtship comes from this kind of transformation of this type of behavior into the concept of that's how you establish marriage. And so marriage had nothing to do with romantic love until the 17th century. It was merely the kind of establishment of an institution whereby there was obligations. However, there was an obligation to love. And so that would flourish through the dedication of self to the spouse. So it really comes out of the Christian idea, because in Rome, marriage was like, it was the slaves.
Mechanical, yeah.
Well, so that's the thing, like slaves were basically, someone put it in a really crude way, but the receptacles.
Selectively bred, yeah.
They were the receptacles of the fluids of the masters. Let's put it that way.
Oh, that's not how I meant that. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're talking about in the Roman Empire, slaves were meat. They were used for pleasure. So it's horrendous. It's awful. It's horrible. But that's why so many Romans left and joined Christianity. That's why they converted, because Christianity offered a better world where you weren't being used for someone's selfish desire. And so the theology of marriage that St. Paul talks about in Ephesians, you know, it kind of lays the groundwork and ultimately culminates in the 1600s with courtship and romantic love. So that's an interesting connection.
It is an interesting connection.
Yeah.
But back to so first of all, you use a really interesting word, right?
Yeah.
Affection. I almost feel like affection is a more appropriate word for what I was describing as a component of love, like in the very beginning of this conversation. And I ended up calling it desire, I think. And I think maybe affection's a better word, or maybe it's both of those things.
I agree with you. Affection has come to mean something different through psychology, but it didn't just mean like the tingling in your fingers or in your chest. Or
the butterflies in the tummy.
Yeah. Affection is it's something that another word, of course, is passion. Now, I know that is also a word that
that was the first word that we used.
Yeah, but that's a word that's come to mean different things, too. It's come to mean hot temper or very intense erotic love, right? But what it used to mean, passion, what's the opposite of passion? Think of the word passive. Now, what's the opposite of that?
Aggressive.
It's getting late.
Clearly.
Okay, should I say, or do you know this one?
No, the opposite of passive?
Come on, okay, this is not a trick question.
The opposite of passive, I would say, is aggressive.
Right. I'm going to. I thought you were.
I'm dead serious. Define passive.
All right, I'll edit that out. So, the opposite of passive is active.
Oh yeah, yeah, you're right. I was thinking passive is like a mindset, not like...
You were thinking in terms of psychology, which is the point. The words have come to mean new and different things, right? So, that being said...
So, I typed in opposite of passive, and it says active, which is what you said, or assertive, which is basically what I meant. So, that's really funny.
Yeah.
So, that was a fair definition.
So, no,
or fair...
it was. Like, in contemporary definitions...
Eminem...
Synonym?
Antonym. See anemone.
So going back to the roots, if active is the opposite of passive, then what is the opposite of passion?
Action.
Yes.
Seriously?
Yeah. So we're recovering the original meaning of these words here, because Aquinas speaks in the 13th century. You know, we got to try to understand what he's saying. You see what I'm saying? And so,
can I equate action with love? If we're talking about love in the context of being a act of will, with the implication there being that passion
if you're
is
using
the opposite of love.
If you're using the word love in its contemporary meaning, I would agree with you. I could be wrong, but I think so. I think you're right.
It's contemporary. I don't think love as an act of will is a contemporary meaning. No,
I'm not saying. I'm saying the word love, the way you understand it in this conversation, is a contemporary. You're trying to come up with... Because for Aquinas, love is not an action, it's a passion. Because remember, for Aquinas, love isn't how you feel about a woman or what you do for her. That's not what love is for Aquinas. For Aquinas, love is the apprehension of the goodness of an object.
Okay.
Desire is moving towards it. Delight is communion. Joy is the fruit of that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So Aquinas doesn't think the way we do, because he has different words. But what's important, the whole point of this, is that if passion and action are antonyms, right, then this helps us understand better what Aquinas meant, and ultimately it'll help us understand human beings better, which is that passion is receiving something, action is something that we give, or it's a move out of self. It's an emanation.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that.
Yeah. So think of it this way. When you throw an axe at a tree, the tree receives that axe, and it's altered. Its structure is altered.
Mm-hmm.
It's been, and so the idea for Aquinas is that passions, emotions, right, are the reception of things that alter us inside. So if there's something distressing in the world outside of me and it affects me, passive, I receive it, that I'm sad or I'm angry. But those are changes that take place in the collision from something on the outside.
Mm-hmm.
So passions ultimately have to do with how I am affected by the world around me. Those are emotions. The word emotion is to move from. I am moved by receiving other things. So that's what passions are. Actions, on the other hand, are prompted by the will and acted out with the body. If I see a good, that's why he defines love as a passion. I'm affected by it. Desire is the action. I'm going to go for it. And then the fruit is the union.
Desire is the action. Yeah,
it's the move towards the good. Yeah. Anyway, but that's kind of a Thomistic anthropology there. But it's 13th century language, so it's different from ours. You see what I'm saying? But it's important to know because it's deeply insightful in a way that we don't have this today. We have psychological terms which are informed by a different kind of anthropology, which is another topic we could talk about, which is what is the contemporary anthropology found in the American Psychological Associations. For example, I think there's good stuff, there's great stuff, but I think there's fundamental misunderstandings of what man is. You see this in Freud. Mm-hmm. Freud completely misunderstands what man is, all the while being a very good observer of facts, of events, of data. But he fundamentally misunderstands what man really is.